It's Pueblo's greatest hits, KPHT 95.5 on a Friends Friday, and I bring in my longtime friend here, Jeff Chostner, Pueblo County District Attorney. Jeff, how you doing?
Good, Nick. Glad to be here with you. I'm glad you suggested this. It's a great thing to do, and always good to spend an hour with you.
Well, we're going to spend 3 hours with me is what's going to happen,
Okay.
So we'll see what you think at the end of
All
three
right.
here
Sounds
or whatever. But, we've known each other for a long time, but we don't know each other really well, so I thought it'd be kind of fun to have you come in here. Now, you're a Pueblo native?
I am. Actually, not to give too much history or detail, but my family is old Pueblo County people. I had a great-great-great-grandfather who was a Union cavalry officer from the Civil War.
Really?
And he came out here in 1875, about 10 years after the war. He and an Army buddy came out here in 1875, and we've been here ever since.
Wow. Yeah. I had no idea. So where did you go, like, to grade school and things like that?
So I grew up in Belmont, although I really kind of claim East Side roots because my mother came from 1620 East 5th.
Okay.
And the larger part of my family was on her side. So we were always at my grandmother's house on East 5th Street. All the family reunions were in Mitchell Park. But I went to Ben Franklin.
Okay. I was just going to ask you. That's probably where you went then.
Yeah, the Great Divide. You either went to Belmont or you went to Franklin. I was a Franklin guy. I was on the south side of Bonfort. And then went to Heaton Junior High. In those days, as you may recall, it was not middle school. So
right.
It was still junior high.
It was junior high for me for 1 year, and then they changed it while I was there, yeah.
So Heaton, when I went there, was 7th, 8th, and 9th. And then went to East from there and did my sophomore, junior, and senior year at East High School.
So you're an
graduating in 1969.
Well, I wasn't going to ask you that.
No, that's right. I'm honest about it. I'll date myself. But, yeah, 69 is when I graduated from East. And then went to University of Colorado Boulder from there. And graduated from CU in 73 with a history and English double major and minor in political science. And as some of you may recall, Vietnam was going on. The draft was in, and I was in Air Force ROTC, had a desire to go back to law school. That's kind of a convoluted story, but at the end of the day, the Air Force let me go back to law school, and they placed me at Ole Miss, University of Mississippi in Oxford, Mississippi. And there they had an ROTC detachment, so they could kind of keep an eye on me.
Your reputation
make sure I had to
there.
check in once a month and make sure I was still academically enrolled. And so I graduated from there in 1980 and went on active duty. I was going to do kind of 4 years for God and country. And come back to Pueblo. But they kept offering me jobs that I liked and locations I liked. And so I stuck with it and was on active duty for 22 years. Came back to Pueblo in late 2001. But law school was good for me. That's where I met my wife Paula. Many of you know Paula.
Right.
She's the
Worked
best
with
thing
her
that's
at
ever
the
happened.
United Way for a long time.
Yeah. Taught here in District 60, and we had our oldest daughter in Oxford, and then on active duty I had my youngest daughter at Altus, Oklahoma. So. They're all military brats.
Wow. Well, there you go. It's Jeff Chostner. We're going to talk more about some of the stuff, your influences, all that kind of stuff coming up here shortly. It's a Friends Friday on KPHT 95.5, Pueblo's greatest hits. It's Pueblo's greatest hits, KPHT 95.5 on a Friends Friday. My friend in today, Jeff Chostner. You know him as Pueblo County DA, but we're going back way before that here, So I was thinking about, you're a little bit older than me, not a lot older than me, a little bit older than me. So I was growing up, since you're, in law school and all that, I was growing up watching Andy Griffith and some of those shows. You were probably watching Perry Mason, right?
I did watch Perry Mason.
Did you really? I watch it now,
You talk about Andy Griffith. That was all those CBS shows. You had Andy Griffith and Green Acres and Petticoat Junction and
Beverly Hillbillies.
Yeah, I believe it or not, I watched those just kind of marginally. I was not big on those. In those days, you had 3 television channels, and I was more of an NBC guy. And so, I was watching different shows on NBC. But
so, did you see the Beatles on Ed Sullivan the first time?
I did. And I may have told you this, Nick. I actually saw them live when they were at Red Rocks and still have my ticket.
Wow.
And I still have witnesses to say, because I know, even though Red Rocks only holds 14,000 people, I'm sure there are, 675,000 that say they were there.
They were there, yeah.
But I have my ticket and I have my witnesses. But I did see them on Ed Sullivan in February of '64, and I can remember where I was each time they played.
Wow.
So the first time was February 9th. And I was playing basketball with a good friend of mine out in front of the house. It was a cold February day, actually evening, because, Ed Sullivan came on at 6.
Right.
And so this fella's mom and sister were supposed to holler at us when they came on. And so I didn't see the whole show, but I saw when they played. And what I can remember from that first show is on one of their numbers, they had a subtitle saying, "This is Paul, this is Ringo, this is George." And when they came to John, they had in parentheses, "Sorry, girls, he's married."
Oh.
And if you ever see the old show, they have that. And then the second time I was at some friend's house, my mother's friend's
in Belmont.
house. In
probably,
Belmont.
Right, okay.
Yeah, both of them were in Belmont. And then the third time was at my father's parents' house on Van Buren, and I watched them that last time. And my grandfather, who was about 70 at the time, he was watching it, and he kind of smiled, and he says, "Well, they're just out to make a quick buck," and with that, whatever the gimmick is. And I was generationally offended by that.
Yeah, I remember my dad saying, "You better not ever act like that or grow your hair like that."
But I was offended and wanted to stick up for the generation. How could you think this was just about money? So. But yeah, I saw them all 3 times. And then on August 26th, 1964, my friend, and I guess I can mention him, but Rich Wolf, and he went to see the Beatles with me, and his mother dropped us off that morning.
At Red Rocks?
At Red Rocks. If you can imagine dropping a kid off at 7:30 in the morning these days.
No.
And the show didn't start until 6, and they had a local Denver band whose name escapes me.
That surprises me because I was going to ask you what you ate that day. Seems like you remember everything.
I'm accused of that. And then the Righteous Brothers came on.
Wow.
But we didn't know who the Righteous Brothers were. That was about 4 or 5 months before You've Lost That Love and Feeling. But I remembered them after, And then the one I did recall at the time was Jackie DeShannon, because she had What the World Needs Now was Love, Sweet Love.
And she was beautiful back in there. Yeah.
And then the Beatles came on about 9 o'clock that night and only played 13 songs, 12 or 13
You'd
songs.
been there since 7 in the morning. Oh.
And, I was kind of, and I've read about this subsequently, but they always did short shows. They only did about 45, 50 minutes.
Wow.
And that's what they had a set playlist, and they shot through it, and that's what happened with us, too. I can remember seeing Brian Epstein. He was up, those of you who know Red Rocks, he was up on kind of the lighting and catwalk above the stage, and I knew who he was, and he was watching the show.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Wow. Now, see, that's awesome stuff.
So I went online about 3 years ago because Rich's sister Barbara was with us and one of her friends. So there's 4 of us all together. And I said, well, in this age of the internet and everything's cataloged. So I went online to try and see if we could see ourselves in the picture. And they had old Denver television station broadcasts, of the event. Right. But I found a still photo with Barbara's picture. I'll send that to you if you want to see it, Nick. But we were just immediately to her right, in the left in the photo. But it's got her looking rapturously at the stage and the Beatles and people going crazy around her. So I had that downloaded, and then for her birthday, I gave it to her a few years ago, and I just said Beatlemania 64. And then down the side, I had the playlist of all 12 or 13 songs that they play. So I think she keeps that in a pretty guarded place.
Well, I would hope so. Yeah.
So anyway.
Jeff Chostner in here on a Friends Friday on KPHT 95.5, Pueblo's Greatest Hits. It's Pueblo's Greatest Hits, KPHT 95.5 on a Friends Friday. With me today, Jeff Chostner. And we were talking Beatles a little bit ago, saw the Beatles live at Red Rocks.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
It's a favorite memory of mine.
Well, of course. Now, people that don't know you may not know this, but you're a big Elvis fan too, right?
I am an Elvis fan. I'm a bigger
because a lot of people that are Beatles fans aren't Elvis fans.
Yeah,
people that are Elvis fans aren't.
Well, there is a preference,
right?
And I definitely prefer the Beatles because I think they were a more creative force. But we had talked about me being up at CU. I had to write a paper once in an American history class, and they said, name he had to write a 3 to 5 page paper on the most important, influential American in American history. And of course, a lot of people wrote on Lincoln or Washington,
George Washington or something. Yeah.
You know, Eisenhower or FDR
Sure.
or whatever. I wrote mine on Elvis. And I said, I with a straight face, I said, I think I can argue that he is the most important person culturally that we've ever had in the nation's history. And I still believe that, because if you look at American culture prior to 1955, 56, it was markedly different than what came after. And of course, the Beatles were a refinement and reiteration of Elvis in many ways. And
they would admit it too.
Yeah, oh yeah, they would tell you that. Mm-hmm. I think Lennon is the one who said nothing existed before Elvis.
Right.
And I think I understand what he's saying culturally, because if you look not just at hairstyles, but if you look at clothing, male clothing in particular, between Elvis's day and prior to that, everything was kind of gray flannel and white shirt.
That's true. Now just think about it. Yeah.
And when you think of Elvis, it's pink and black and blue suede shoes.
True.
And, and that carried on even more with the Beatles, with all the all the shirt styles, and suits, and then getting rid of suits, and tennis shoes
Sergeant
being
Peppers
used.
And all that stuff. Wow.
And tennis shoes being used. I mean, we carry on with it today.
Right.
Being combined with formal wear.
Right.
And all kinds of things that are taken naturally today. You know, Nick, you and I were kind of there at the change when that took place.
Right.
And it was really profound and very fundamental. It's not just about music. It's about culture.
Right, and some of that still carries on today,
does.
obviously. So speaking of Elvis, you ever been to Graceland?
Yeah, I had. I've been there 3 times, but the first time was kind of the most interesting to me. I was going to law school at University of Mississippi, Ole Miss, down in Oxford, Mississippi, which is about 70 miles from Memphis.
Okay.
And any major transportation in and out of Mississippi was out of Memphis. And so I was coming home for Christmas break, December of '76, and Elvis was still alive.
Right, yeah.
So I had a good friend from Ole Miss, and he lived about 6-8 blocks from Graceland, and I had about 4 or 5 hours to kill before my plane from Memphis to Denver for Christmas break. And he says, hey, you want to stop by my house and kill some time? So I went there. Then he said, you ever been to Graceland? I said, no, not really. I've driven by it, but I've never really been there.
Right.
He said, well, you got time. Let's go up to Graceland. So we did. And
this is when Elvis is still alive.
Elvis is still alive.
Okay,
yeah, this is
right.
December of '76.
Right.
So we go up, and if anybody remembers the old Graceland, it was, the old stone wall and still had the musical gates. And on the other side of the musical gates on Graceland proper was a Jeep there. And in it was a fella performing security that I later found out was his Uncle Vester. I didn't know it at the time, but I have since found that out.
Okay.
So he comes up to the gate, and he sees Steve and I, and he says, yeah.
So there weren't throngs of people
No,
there.
No, it wasn't, because Elvis was alive. It was still kind of an everyday thing.
Right.
It was just really kind of a residence.
Right.
So Vester gets out of the Jeep, and he comes up and says, where are you boys from? And I said, well, sir, I'm from Colorado. And he didn't know I was going to school down south. I think he thought I was a tourist. So he says, yeah, y'all ever been on Graceland? I said, no, sir, never have. He said, well, I'll give you a little ride. So those of you
I can hear him talking just like this too, yeah.
Well, it made an impression. So those of you who've been to Graceland, there's kind of a teardrop driveway that goes up to the front door and then comes back down to the gate. So we get in the Jeep, and Steve gets in the back seat, and I'm in the passenger seat, and we're kind of driving slowly up towards the front.
Just checking everything out.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. I mean, I'm just amazed at how lucky we are to even get on the property and how friendly Uncle Vester is. So I say to him, I say, so is Elvis here? And he says, yes, sir, he is. And I say, so what's he doing? He says, well, he's inside. He's playing a little pool with the boys.
The Memphis Mafia or whatever.
Yeah. Since then, that's all I can guess, but with the boys.
Right.
And so I said, so what's the chance I can go in and show him a little 8-ball? He says, not a chance in hell, son. And I broke out laughing at the time because I knew it was a pretty big ask, somebody off the street to go meet Elvis. But I laughed. But he was still very nice, and he kind of gave us a tour. We came back down that teardrop.
But if you wouldn't have asked, you'd have never known.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe I should have asked.
And it's been haunting me to this day.
Yeah.
So,
So now you know.
Now I know. But I was still close enough. That driveway takes you up pretty close to the front door, and he was in if you know where the jungle room is, that's right kind of on the front part of the house. I don't know.
So I
was still in breathing distance.
Yeah, I was going to say you were within feet or yards.
Yeah. And then he passed away that following August, about 8 or 9 months later.
Right.
So,
yeah, that's
so,
awesome.
Yeah, so that was kind of fun.
So you were an Elvis fan then, obviously.
I'm a
even after he told you no that you couldn't meet him.
That's right. I'm an Elvis black and white 1950s fan. I really think he lost a lot of
you didn't like the jumpsuit and all
the
that.
60s Elvis stuff.
The movies and all that, yeah.
With the exception of the 68 comeback special. That was pretty powerful.
Yeah. Now, have you watched the Elvis movie
I have.
That won the
I have.
The actor won the Academy Award?
I thought it was terrific, and Baz Luhrmann is the one who films it.
Right.
He does such things with color. Any film he does, like Moulin Rouge or The Great Gatsby, just jumps off the screen.
Right.
So I wanted to see it as much for him. I think, not to be disparaging, but I think it's the Elvis we wish we had had, the one who would have had the backbone to stand up to the Colonel.
Right.
And I think they try and make it sound like he did, but some of those things are not historically accurate.
Right. No, I agree.
So I think it's more the Elvis we wish we would have had rather than the one that really never mustered the courage to take the Colonel on and say, I'm the one with the talent, not you.
Right. I agree with you.
So
I agree. But I enjoyed the movie.
I did too. I thought, and I've encouraged a lot of people to go see it. I think it's a terrific show.
Absolutely. Well, there you go. Jeff Chostner in here on a Friends Friday on KPHT 95.5. Pueblo's greatest hits. It's Pueblo's greatest hits, KPHT 95.5 on a Friends Friday. My friend in today, Jeff Chostner, Pueblo native. I did not know that. Yeah, I didn't know that. We caught up with each other later in life, so I didn't know that. But did you play any sports at East or anything?
Oh, yeah.
Did you really?
I played basketball and baseball.
Uh-huh.
We were a good 500 team all the time. I was. we won about as many as we lost, but had a lot of my really good friends from East are still lifelong friends.
Uh-huh.
Gary Trujillo, who was the principal over at Bessemer,
Mm-hmm.
Bobby Salazar, who's a terrific lawyer. He was up in Denver. He's down in Texas now. Dave and Rita Marcus. I'm just trying to think some of the others. Lynette Ritchie. But people I play sports with, Randy DeTurk. You may know his older brother, Scotty, since we're talking rock and roll. But Scott was the one that did the old High and Mighty and 20th Century Fox.
Oh, I didn't know that.
They were written up in Rolling Stone in about 1970.
And
Scott is still doing musical productions in Los Angeles.
Wow.
So
Pueblo roots again.
Well, we are the hub of the universe. I tell
it
people
sure
that,
seems like it, yeah.
But yeah, I played sports at East. I was that's how I got into politics. Was in both at Heaton and at East. I was on student council at Heaton. Ultimately, was a student body president at
that's
East.
what I was going to ask you. So when you were a kid or in high school or whatever, were your dreams of being a lawyer, or were some people's dreams are being being Mickey Mantle or being Elvis or being
that's an interesting.
Were your thoughts of being is that kind of what you were thinking back then too?
I really was.
Wow.
I hate to say this, but it's a good question. I think I was kind of formed out of the womb. I don't know. And I can remember writing down in fifth grade, what do you want to be? And I said I wanted to be in elective office.
Uh-huh.
I wanted to write books, and I wanted to sing. So I've made elective office, and I've written 4 books. The singing part,
and today we're going to get the singing, right?
Yeah, that's it.
So if I was going to ask,
I always say as a baseball player, I'm a really good singer, because if you can hit 2 out of 3 balls in baseball, you're good. I can hit 2 out of 3
notes is okay.
Yeah.
So if I was going to ask you to sing, what song would you sing right now? And I'm not going to put you on the spot, but if I was say, Jeff, I want you to sing your all-time favorite song, what would that be?
You know what my all-time favorite song is? And I'm not going to sing it because it's way beyond my capacity. But my all-time favorite song is Stardust.
Stardust.
Yeah, the Nat Cole version
right.
of it. I think it is a perfect blend of melody, lyric, and production. And it's so typical of the 50s, too.
Right.
But, yeah, Stardust is my favorite song.
See, I'd have to go with God Only Knows by the Beach Boys, because same thing. Written.
Off of Pet Sounds.
Yes. Very good. Very good. See, he's not just the district attorney. He's a rock and roller at heart.
I've got a rock and roll room at home. And
do you really?
I do. Up on the top floor of my house, I've got a rock and roll archive up there with, as we were talking about, Yellow Sun records and Beatle memorabilia, some Rolling Stone stuff.
I was just going to ask
stuff.
you, people who like Elvis and the Beatles don't necessarily like the Rolling Stones, but do you like the Rolling Stones?
I know. It was always that. I do like the Rolling Stones
do too,
a lot.
man.
But again, I prefer the Beatles. But it was that whole thing, are you into the Beatles and love, or are you into the Stones and money?
Right.
A little sympathy for the devil there.
And the Stones are still raking in the money, too.
They are.
Yeah.
But, when the Beatles broke up in 70, really, I think the Stones took off because they were part of that English, British invasion legacy. And I really think they came into their own. I think some of the albums they made, particularly in the early 70s, were every bit as capable as what the Beatles had done.
Oh, yeah. And I'll bet Mick Jagger's a fan of the Beatles, and I'll bet Paul McCartney's a fan of the Stones,
They
too.
take the Mickey out of each other, though, every now and then.
Every once in a while.
What was it that McCartney said here recently, that the Stones were a pretty good blues band.
Yeah.
And that's all. I think that's the only credit, and I think Mick took a little offense to that.
And you can see Paul doing that in jest, probably.
And when the Beatles were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Mick did the introductory talk, but it was kind of laced with jealousy and envy. So,
not that they didn't get in there, too, later on. Yeah,
exactly.
But, yeah. Jeff Chostner in here on a Friends Friday on KPHT 95.5, Pueblo's Greatest Hits. It's Pueblo's Greatest Hits, KPHT 95.5. With me today, Jeff Chostner in here on a Friends Friday. And as I mentioned, we go back a lot of years, but not back to like youth times and that. But you, as you were mentioning the last time we talked here a few minutes ago, you kind of were destined to be in law, it sounds like, right?
Law was always an interest to me. And one of the things I like about it is that it's so flexible. I mean, there's so many areas. You say the law, but what are you talking about?
Right.
Obviously, I'm in criminal law now, but it could be property, it could be taxation, it could be
divorce or anything.
Yeah, it could be divorce, it could be banking law, it could be patent law. Yeah, one of my friends from high school, I had mentioned that I was student body president at East. At the same time, a fellow named Chris Taravella was student body president at South, and we knew each other through student government.
Right.
And Chris ended up going to the Air Force Academy and then went to CU Law School. And so he went on active duty as a JAG just about the same time I did.
Wow.
And talking about patent law, Chris was really good with that, and he worked on patents for Air Force products. So like if a new F-15 or 16 came up with a particular widget that it needed on the plane, Chris would patent that so it couldn't be used by competitors or even foreign adversaries. He did that. And then later got hired by GM to patent GM products.
Corvettes or
Corvettes
whatever,
or parts of Corvettes.
Sure.
There's again talking about good lifelong friends.
Right.
Chris had done that, and we would bump into each other on active duty every day.
I'll be darned. Well, I was thinking back earlier. In my lifetime, I can only remember 3 district attorneys. I can remember, obviously Gus Sandstrom, Joe LoSavio, and you.
Yeah.
So is everybody kind of for the long haul on that for the most part?
Well, and the one in between Gus and me was Bill Tebow.
Oh, that's right. See,
Yeah,
I
so
didn't.
Bill had
but
been
he
in
was
there
kind
for
of
8
short time.
He
in
had
there.
done 8 years.
Oh, 8 years.
But Gus did 24.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, I started out under LoSavio. When I was in law school, I came home to do interns. From Ole Miss, I would come home for the summer, and Joe, bad judgment, but he hired me to.
What was he thinking, right?
What was he thinking? But he took pity on me or whatever, and so I worked with Joe for 3 summers, and it was a great experience.
Well, I'm sure. But things have really changed as far as the law and things like that, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. It's a completely different animal in terms of criminal law. The laws and the statutes that have come down are completely different. Not completely different, but significantly different today than what they were then. And running an office is so much different, even from Gus's time.
Right.
In terms of, budgeting, financing, the time you have to spend in the legislature, testifying on bills, personnel issues. The people you hire today are different than what they
Oh, yeah, no
I know
doubt.
that's hard to,
no doubt.
hard to believe.
They're different at McDonald's even.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So, all of that has kind of changed from the old days when, the expectation is your DA would just be in court every day. Well, it's not like that anymore.
Oh, really?
And I always am assigned to a case. I always try and make sure I'm involved with the case. I think I owe that to my office as well as to the public. But to carry your own docket, there's no DA in the state of Colorado that does that because there's just too many administrative things that you've got to take care of.
So you have a variety of deputies underneath you then, I take.
Oh, I do.
Correct?
So the DA's office total here is 72 people.
Wow.
Most people think we're like 15 people.
I was thinking like 5.
And a secretary and me.
Yeah.
But no, we have 72 people, and we have several components of the office. We have a systems unit that handles all of our computers. We have a victim advocates office that takes care of victims in terms of explaining the process to them, making sure that we get them benefits that they need, whether that's psychological services, repair to their car that's been damaged, in some cases, unfortunately, funeral services, those kind of things. We have a diversion program that if we want to divert people out of, if it's a youthful offense where we think the young person is rehabilitatable, we'll try and work with them to kind of keep them off the criminal justice rolls. And I have an investigative unit, and I have, as a chief law enforcement officer of Pueblo County, I can assign my investigators to investigate whatever we need to get done.
Wow.
So, and then on top of that, of the 72 people, 27 are attorney slots. However, of those 27 today, I've only got 17 on staff. There's a severe shortage in law enforcement in general to get people to apply to law enforcement. And this is not just a Pueblo issue, it's a statewide phenomenon, it's a national one. But as you may know, on any given day, the sheriff's department is down 50 to 75 deputies.
Yeah, I was reading that a while back. Wow.
And the police department's down 20 to 25, and I'm down 10 attorneys. So it has an impact on our ability to swiftly address some of the crime.
Sure.
We haven't stopped doing it, but I do think the manpower issues.
If you got 27 people or you got 17, it's going to take more time.
It slows it down.
Yeah.
So we're still taking all the cases that come in the door. We're charging them as effectively and as strongly as we can. But if you're down 40% of your workload, it does affect how quickly you can do some of these things.
Sure. Well, there you go. Jeff Chostner in here on a Friends Friday on KPHT 95.5, Pueblo's greatest hits. It's Pueblo's greatest hits, KPHT 95.5 on a Friends Friday. My friend in today, Jeff Chostner. You know him as Pueblo County District Attorney and lifelong Puebloan. I didn't know that, but as you mentioned, you had people come here in the 1870s or something, part of your family?
Yeah, like I say, I'd have to count how many greats, but it was my grandmother's grandfather. So I think that's a great-great-great-grandfather.
Close enough. I'm not going to argue with you over that, so in the 50s and that, growing up?
Yeah, more recently, I may be dating myself a little bit, but some of your listenership may recall both of my grandparents ran the old Midwest Business College, which was on 4th and Main. You know where the Pope block is on 4th Street?
Right.
You see the sign that says Pope. They were up on the 3rd floor. Later,
there's a boxing place downstairs right now or something, a boxing training place or something. Yeah. Oh, yeah, okay.
And where Qual Med was back in the 90s. But that was the old Midwest Business College, and my grandparents ran that from 1931 to about 1970. And my grandmother had her own music store. It was called Silver State Music Company. It was on Main Street, and she sold musical instruments. She sang opera.
Wow!
So she had a real musical background.
You didn't get that part of the family, then? You're
like I say, 2 out of 3. And but my grandfather needed help with the business school, so in 1939 she sold Silver State to the Martin family. So many of you are probably familiar with Martin Music. And
Martin Music was out in Blinn there.
It was out in Blinn. That's where it ended up. That's probably where most people remember it. But originally it was up on the Mesa Junction. It was on Abriendo and Broadway. And there's a dance studio up there now. It was across the street from Chin's.
Photography.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know exactly where.
But then they moved out to Blinn, and they were out there. But my grandmother's inventory started Martin Music. And she retained a 1923 baby grand piano, which is now in my house, and I still plunk away on it. Other members of the family are better piano players than me, but I've tried to go back and reteach myself how to play piano a little bit. It's good for the mind to exercise. Like
I'm sure. Eye-hand coordination, all that stuff. Yeah.
And then his generation is pretty much faded away. But my dad was a dentist here in town, and he and his offices were across the street from Rosemont, which used to be an old house. Maybe many of your listeners remember. But Dr. Hurley was there, Grant Hurley, and Carl Schwartz. Schwartz was a pediatrician, Hurley was the internist, and my dad was the dentist, and they were all in that house. So it was kind of in the early to mid 50s, it was like an HMO. Before HMOs came along, it was kind of a full service kind of thing.
You could go in there and come out a new person when you have to.
Yeah, more or less. So, like I say, we've been here quite a while. My dad, as a dentist, went to Creighton University, and there's a good many dentists in town who went there. And so there's kind of this society of Creighton dentists that you find here in
Did
town.
your dad think you were crazy for not following in his footsteps?
He thought I was just crazy.
He just thought you were crazy because of life in general. Then.
And my grandfather really pressed me to go into dentistry. But it wasn't for me.
Wasn't your deal,
no.
yeah.
But my daughter thought about it, and I've got a grandson who's looking at it. So I don't know, maybe it's in the DNA there somewhere.
My dad always told me, when are you going to quit that radio stuff and go get a real job?
Yeah, but you're having too much fun.
Yeah. How do you explain that to your dad? Yeah. 30-some years later. But hey, Jeff Chostner in here on a Friends Friday on KPHT 95.5, Pueblo's greatest hits. It's Pueblo's greatest hits, KPHT 95.5 on a Friends Friday. My friend in today, Jeff Chostner, Pueblo County District Attorney, but right now we're just talking stuff. And Pueblo, so since you're a Pueblo native, I mean, Pueblo really changed. I mean, remember CF&I and all that after everything kind of stalled there at CF&I, Pueblo really changed.
Yeah, there's been a whole lot of things that got on. Just to back up, I was thinking about it, Nick. I was in the service. I was gone from Pueblo for about 25 years. And so when I retired, it was kind of a question of where we wanted to come back to. Paula and I knew we wanted to come back to Colorado, but, there's job opportunities in Denver, Boulder, that kind of. But at the end of the day, I said, no, I want to come back to Pueblo. I mean, there's a big magnet under this town that brings people back. And it is the people. It's the culture, and you remember what a slopper tastes like, and going to – I don't want to single out any particular business because there's so many great ones here in terms of food culture and all that. And so we wanted to come back to Pueblo, and it's on a human scale, and you feel like you can make a difference here. So, and I also wanted to resync that legacy that I was talking about, 150 years for my kids and my grandkids.
Right. Okay.
If they wanted it, I wanted that available to them.
Right.
Unfortunately, Michelle has come back, and her kids and husband, they're all here. So they're now 7th generation Coloradoans.
Wow.
And I'm a 5th generation. So it's very satisfying and gratifying to come back to Pueblo. In terms of the changes, because I've always had a political itch, as you know, I got involved with city council and county commissioners before I was DA. But I often think how much Pueblo has changed, and we don't really think of it as Puebloans because it just sort of by osmosis comes into being. But if one were to stand where the Rawlings Library is on Abriendo and look down South Main and think what that looked like in summer 2001 when I got out of the Air Force and what it looks like today.
Totally different.
Yeah, completely. I mean, the first thing is immediately behind you would have been the old library.
Right.
And you and I may even remember the McClellan Library from before that one.
Right.
But nevertheless, the more modern version.
The KDZA studios were there, as a matter of fact.
There.
Right
exactly.
there.
And I remember that well. But you've got a new brand spanking $21 million library that is, it's a jewel in Pueblo. But you look down, you see a new police building. You see a remodeled old police building. You see a parking structure was there. You see a river walk that was never there.
Yeah.
You see the waterfall that's down there. You see all the buildings along the Riverwalk
that have all been restored
since 2001.
Yeah,
either restored or redone.
Right,
and you could go on and on with
even Memorial Hall and all that.
Memorial Hall's been renovated. You have DOS Aviation that's out here that brings in Air Force and Navy pilots for pre-pilot training. You just go on and on with what's gone on, and I think the thing that makes me most proud of it is that Pueblo has done that on its own. We brought ourselves up by our own bootstraps because we've been willing, unlike other communities, particularly ones to the north of us, that aren't willing to tax themselves or put their hand in their own pocket and said, no, we believe in community renovation. And so, if you're standing there by the library looking down South Main, you're probably looking at close to $300 million in projects, if not more, that we've done over the last 20 years, and we have paid for that ourselves.
Out of the half-cent sales
the convention,
tax,
the renovated convention center, the Marriott's there.
Yeah,
that it was only newly up in 2000,
and expanded now.
Yeah. And to the extent I had anything to do with that, serving on these governmental entities, I'm really proud of that. I often refer to this as the Pueblo Renaissance, and it's kind of been slow in coming. But it's here. But it's happened at a pace where sometimes it's just integrated into your vision of the community, and you forget that it wasn't there. So that's why I go back to the summer of 2001 when I came here and say, remember what it was like if somebody had taken a picture of that,
right? And
what it looks like today. And of course, you can look at other parts of the town too. There was the old health department that was down there.
Right.
Now we have a brand spanking new one. We have a new judicial building. We have a new emergency operations center for the sheriff's department. So just on and on you can go with all of the money that's been put into this community at the generosity of the taxpayer to improve their community. And now I think we have those things are more about the quality of the community rather than the quantity of the community.
Right.
That because of the quality, I think we have been discovered and people are starting to come here. When I came back in 2001, the county population was about 145,000. Now it's about 170,000. That we always, from 1950 on, we always used to say Pueblo was 100,000.
100,000, yeah.
Now we're saying it's about 110. So that growth is happening not just in the county now; it's starting to happen in the city, and you're seeing a regentrification of the community where old houses, old neighborhoods are starting to be upgraded. And I see, as you know, I live right downtown. Paula and I wanted to come back and be part of the center of the city, not necessarily the newer parts, and I'm glad those are happening. But I'm an old Pueblo boy, and my heart and soul is in old Pueblo. And so we live in an old neighborhood in a historic area that we think is not just for us and maybe our kids, but we want to keep up to date for the community because there's so much community history in the block, Pueblo history in the block where we live. We want to, whenever we leave that and move on, we want to make sure that another generation of people take care of it as well as we did it, or at least on our watch, we did the best with it we could.
Awesome. Well, that's Pueblo. Those roots run deep.
They really do. Yeah. And, you were talking about high school stuff. The sports I played, I think about the people I played against. And I bump into, a Bill Wilkerson or John Smith from Centennial, or I watched Terry Snyder play at Central, and Eddie Robinson, and Jim Harrison and Jim Barnes at South. Those are the guys. Yeah, we were tough rivals in the day, but I bump into those guys from time to time. Chuck Kokenberger,
right?
And we talk about an old East-South game, and we laugh about it and have a great time. That's the bonds of this community.
Absolutely.
And I think it's incumbent that new people come here, not be put off by that, but try and join into it and say, hey, your kids.
Let's start from here.
Your kids are going to have lifelong friends here, too, that you can develop and create in Pueblo and Pueblo County that you may not have in Denver where you have so many transients from elsewhere. They don't care. You have a core of people here who care.
There you go. Exactly. Said perfectly.
Yeah.
Said perfectly. Jeff Chostner in here on a Friends Friday on KPHT 95.5, Pueblo's greatest hits. Pueblo's greatest hits, KPHT 95.5 on a Friends Friday. One more time, I've got my friend Jeff Chostner in here. Appreciate you coming in. Appreciate you taking the time. Appreciate you getting up early. Do you normally get up this early to be in here at 6 in the morning?
Yeah, I do actually. But I can't say if it's of my own volition. I had the Air Force that got me up early, and Paula is a farmer's daughter.
Oh,
and there was no hope. So I mean, typically we're up between 5 and 5:30, and I'm usually in the office about 6:30, 6:45.
Well, speaking of the office, I know I'm not kissing up to you, but you take a lot of heat sometimes over things that are going on, and a lot of things have changed, as we mentioned again here too.
Yeah,
right?
And I think there's a lot of things going on in society as a whole,
right?
And they're not unique to Pueblo. They're happening in the state. They're happening nationwide, probably worldwide. I think there's a generational change going on. I think. Unfortunately, we live in a cruder, more crass society than we once did. I think I try and talk to people rationally and reasonably. I'm guided by the law, so I kind of have rules and structure so that we can put the debate in that. But if you talk about politics in general, there's less rationality to it, much more emotion, less willing to put yourself in the other people's shoes, so you can understand the other fellow's point of view. I try and do that still. That's the way I was brought up. That's just the way I am.
Right.
I often say, Nick, I owe the public an answer to every question they have.
Mm-hmm.
I don't owe them the answer that they want to hear. Because
it's kind of like your mom asking. You ask your mom something, might not get the answer you want.
I think 85% of the time, the answer I give people is one that they understand and they accept at the end of the day. I think people will try and understand it, and if you take time with it, they will. But there's probably 10 or 15% of the people that no matter what you say, they dislike you for whatever reason. Maybe because I went to East. Maybe
I was kind of thinking that myself.
I know your background. But, whatever it is, or they're on a different side of a political...
I don't know if I like to hear that the district attorney knows my background.
Oh, I do. And I'm trying to keep that folder hidden on you, Nick.
I appreciate it.
I
appreciate it.
I shouldn't even say that because they think it's true. I'm just teasing with you.
No, I know. But what people don't realize is who you vote in and who this and that and changes of the laws and stuff. You just enforce the laws, what you're doing, basically.
And we're in such a hyper-partisan atmosphere that... I use this example. I served in the military 25 years, 22 on active and 3 in ROTC. My wife and I try and go in church every Sunday. We make it 2 or 3 times a month. But because I put a Democrat, behind my name, I'm being told I'm godless and unpatriotic, and usually by some kid who's never served a day in uniform.
No kidding. Yeah,
that's the irrationality of what and the lack of understanding I'm talking about. I have never worried about politics too much in terms of the job I do.
Right.
I think I'm here to represent everybody. I don't care what their party affiliation is or isn't. I want to try and protect people as best I can. And that's what we're into is public safety, and we're doing best we can. We've all been kind of hamstrung, though, in recent years. And I have been critical of people even of my own party. For passing legislation that I think is harmful to the public interest. And I've been very vocal about it and gone on radio and television. I usually don't chase television cameras, but when I think it's going to hurt public safety, I don't mind stepping up and talking about it, whether it's the governor, attorney general, or local officials. I have said, look, this is not good for the public. It is going to increase a risk to the public. And so I'll continue to talk about that. And so one of the atmosphere things where you've talked about or asked about, Nick, is, how all the law enforcement agencies, whether it's police, sheriff, state patrol, or the DA's office, are all kind of at a disadvantage to some extent because of the legislation that's been passed the last couple of years where felonies are made into misdemeanors and misdemeanors into ticketing offenses. And there's more of an attitude towards letting people out of jail and rehabilitation rather than punitive, quite frankly, putting people in jail that need to be there. I'm about rehabilitation if we can rehabilitate people too. We've got several experimental programs. But at the end of the day, there's people that need to be off the streets.
Not everybody can be rehabilitated.
Right. And you need to go to bed on Friday or Saturday night not worried about, break-ins or car thefts and those kind of things. So we're working very hard on it. But I do have to say there's been somewhat of a headwind against us given legislative changes over the last 2 sessions.
Kind of tying your hands up a little bit there.
And I think if you talk to the sheriff, I think if you talk to the chief of police, I think you will hear them say that as strongly or more so than me.
Speaking of, we have a new sheriff, new chief of police. So things are changing.
Yeah, but I think good. I mean, I work with all of the agencies closely. We're talking really on a daily basis. But Dave Lucero is going to be a great sheriff. I've worked with him over the last 10 years in lesser capacities in the sheriff's department. He does a great job, very committed to the public. Chris Knoller is terrific. Troy Davenport, who I'm sure you know from his days, he's now my chief investigator. I had mentioned I had an investigative unit, and Troy works in my office now. And you can imagine the wealth of experience he brings. So, and many of us are Pueblo boys. Troy's from here, I'm from here. Dave's from Raton, but Kirk Taylor was from Pueblo County. So we're not just doing this as a job. This is our home.
You're living in the middle of it.
We're living in the middle of it too. Yeah. We don't just dance in and out of here for, it's important to us. And my kids and grandkids have chosen to make Pueblo home. So
awesome.
Yeah, so it's not
awesome.
To keep that generational thing going for maybe another 50 years. We'll see.
There you go, Jeff Chostner. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to put you on the spot. If you could sing with one group, and let's just say you could sing, all right?
Yeah, that's a big jump there.
If you could sing with one group and one particular song, what would it be?
Kinks. You really got me.
You're kidding.
No, I think the Kinks are the
and that was unstaged. I just asked you.
No, you did.
I had no idea.
I think the Kinks, when rock historians look back 50 years from now and say it's the 100th anniversary of the Ed Sullivan Show, what's the archetypal group that came out of the 60s and 70s? I think they'll say the Kinks. I think the Kinks will be taught in courses at universities because they are so representative of the British invasion, their clever lyrics, and their creative
hard driving rock and roll. Jeff Chostner, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. It's a Friends Friday on KPHT 95.5, Pueblo's greatest hits.